Tamo to mafi tapu ke tu Tonga ki tu bon ku na spau fa le hamoyo tamo ke he ni ke minista ki moli anusila honorable Nanaia Mahuta tapu ni ke hoi minista kabineti ka ma ki na tol ko to pe mo fa data mai e ho ta fe afikoni ka tamo ke kamata tau press conference ko ni ho ta ni. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure for me to welcome the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta, New Zealand's Minister of Foreign Affairs, on her first official visit to the Kingdom. Tonga and New Zealand are inextricably linked as countries, and through our people, we share history. We are bound by our cultural and ancestral links through our Polynesian heritage. Our countries are connected by the Blue Pacific Ocean. Indeed, we share common values. We share mutual respect, friendship, collective ambition, and we aim for sustainability and including all in our efforts. Earlier today, the Honourable Minister was received in an audience by His Majesty King Tupou VI. And this afternoon, the Honourable Minister and I, together with her counterpart here in Tonga, Honourable Fikitamueloa Utoikamanu, concluded a fruitful and productive talanoa. I thanked her and New Zealand for the immediate and prompt assistance delivered in the support of Tonga's response and recovery following the violent volcanic eruption of Tonga, Hu'akavameiliku, and ensuing tsunami in January 15. New Zealand's assistance became very visible and prominent to all of us following the eruption. Many will recall the sight of Royal New Zealand Air Force flights only a few days after the eruption, sweeping across our skies. It was a sign of hope to all of us affected. Initially, these flights provided critical surveillance. We needed to know quickly the impacts on people in areas we could not reach because of the damages to our telecom and digital infrastructure. We needed to know this urgently so we could provide much-needed supplies of water, food, technology, and general relief to the many people affected. The planes were followed by Her Majesty's New Zealand ship Canterbury, Aotearoa, and Wellington. I wish to and must again acknowledge the critical role the previous High Commissioner Tiffany Pappington played during this time. I also welcome how the same drive and hard work are already extended to us by his successor, Matthew Howell. New Zealand also contributed towards thousands of vaccines which enable us to take proactive measures in the fight against COVID-19. And New Zealand continues to provide crucial assistance to our health sector. Our discussion this afternoon covered a wide range of issues important for both Tonga and New Zealand. I thank the government and the people of New Zealand through her Honourable Minister for the long-standing and ongoing bilateral assistance from New Zealand. This assistance is much needed for our sustainable development. The funding goes to our priority areas of strengthening sustainable economic development, energy, law, justice, and education. We look into how we can strengthen our climate advocacy. We must amplify the leadership our Pacific Islands have already made on the international stage. This is vital to all our people and our futures. We agree that our defense cooperations remain strong. 2 New Zealand military vessels are currently visiting Tonga on routine calls. I asked the Foreign Minister for her continued assistance toward Tonga's priority development areas for our people. One such milestone project is the rebuilding of the Parliament building, the House of the People, which was destroyed by Cyclone Kita. New Zealand and Australia are co-funding its construction. We are most thankful for this support. We also discussed developments in the region and internationally. We discussed how we can make use of the opportunities presented by our regional context and how we must work together to tackle the shared challenges that we face. Through the Honourable Minister, I extended an invitation to Prime Minister Ardern to visit Tonga in the near future. We look forward to our shared future, to welcoming tourism gradually picking up again, to welcoming New Zealanders and our diaspora to our friendly islands, to Tongans getting the opportunity to work in and for your country, and to more reciprocal high-level visit between our countries. It is all about our shared desire to strengthen the long-standing and friendly relations that we have built over the years. Malo pito.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I would like to thank His Royal Highness the King, the Right Honourable Prime Minister, your government and the people of Tonga for warmly welcoming our delegation here today to Tonga. The relationship is close and long-standing and has been forged over a long period of time. And as has been mentioned, we discussed a number of issues. In relation to Tonga Hunga Hāpai and the role in which New Zealand played, there has been no role greater than the immediate response of the people of Tonga to ensure that their people were safe, and New Zealand is only too happy that we were able to ensure quick and fast assistance where it was needed most, and that's been referred to. Can I also add that the way in which we've been able to work with Tonga to support their response to COVID has also been a testament to the nature of our relationship, because on the one part, our role in providing vaccinations, medical supplies and support where requested and where sought, has amplified a local response to keep the people of Tonga safe, and can I acknowledge local health workers who are critical in that response. In terms of our conversation around our common aspirations around both regional security arrangements and domestic arrangements, we have a shared ambition, and that's that we look together towards each other if there is a need in the area of security, and I continue to welcome the ongoing conversations that we are having in this area. I'm here because I am making an announcement tomorrow in relation to the existential challenge in the Pacific, which is climate change. And it seems to me that Tonga is a very good place to be able to make that announcement, because when New Zealand pledged at COP26 $1.3 billion of climate finance, 50% of which will go to the Pacific, 50% of which will go to adaptation, we now have the very real opportunity to support a Pacific-led approach, and that will start with our ambition to enable Tonga to be able to roll out its own response in this particular area. Can I come back to the issue of the strategic relationship, strategic partnership? Now is a real opportunity for us to continue to refine and define what that relationship will look like going forward. And it seems to me with the existential challenge of climate change, that is a key area of conversation. The other issue is around economic resilience and what we can do to work together to ensure that the nature of our partnership supports the aspirations of Tonga going forward. And then there's a broader regional challenge that we will commit ourselves to as we work on those significant bilateral interests. And those regional challenges are, as I've stated, making sure that we have common aspirations around realising the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent that came out of the Pacific Island Forum, and that does underpin much of the strategic conversation, both at a regional and bilateral level. But can I again come back to the Prime Minister and thank you for your generous hospitality for our team at this time.
Right. Good afternoon, Minister. Just a quick question. You were received by the King this afternoon in Ewa. What were any issues or main concerns that were discussed with His Majesty?
Oh, look, we had a wide-ranging level of conversation, very strategic in terms of what's happening within the region. It's was a warm and very hospitable lunch, and it's clear to see that the King's aspirations for the Kingdom of Tonga puts Tonga absolutely front row centre to the things that he thinks about when he looks around when he looks at what's happening around the world, a global pandemic, crisis in the north, and also climate change. It's very clear to me in the conversation that we have, he always puts the interests of Tonga at the forefront of his mind.
Welcome to Tonga, Minister. I know that you'll be addressing climate change resilience tomorrow, but I just wanted to ask, what main specific area of concern for New Zealand to address in terms of climate change on your visit here to Tonga?
Well, there are a number of challenges that we all face, and we require a global effort in response to climate change. But in relation to our climate finance commitment, we know that New Zealand can play a key role to enable outcomes in the Pacific if we take a partner-led response. And that's the key message, because we need development partners to be able to look towards the way in which they can assist the Pacific, with a view in mind that partnering the Pacific on Pacific-led solutions is entirely a prospect and a set of solutions that could better coordinate funding in this area. And we hope to be in front of that message, but also not only strong advocates, but proponents of a different way of doing things in this area. And we can learn from some of the challenges that are already out there. The administrative challenge of accessing funds for the Pacific are a continuing challenge, and we could make things easier on that front.
Minister, obviously the superpowers have been in town. How can New Zealand make a big splash, make a big difference to the relationship here in Tonga and what we give as a partner?
I think in relation to the superpower influence within the region, we can join the conversation that the Pacific want to have, which primarily is about peace, stability and prosperity. And for that to occur, the conversation that we've just come from regionally, which was at the Pacific Island Forum, was that a clear and unequivocal message is that the Pacific want to continue to assert peace, stability and prosperity across the Pacific, that the tussle of superpowers is a challenge we all recognise, but the message is unequivocal to all superpowers coming into the region. And we need the Pacific to continue to be, in my mind, nuclear-free. In my mind, working with the Pacific on its existential challenge of climate change, because that is the security threat. And in my mind, understanding that the key ambitions of the Pacific in these areas will in part help to focus what has become a competition of interest to, hopefully, a strategic collaboration of opportunity in the area that is most harmful to the Pacific: climate change and compounding economic vulnerability.
Prime Minister, your border's just been open for a couple of weeks, but if you were to give me an economic snapshot today, what does that look like?
Well, it's hard to actually measure the economic upturn in terms of the opening of the border, given that we have our inflation is pretty high. Most of it tend to be imported due to the fuel and so forth. But judging by what's happening lately with the number of visitors we're having, we are reasonably very happy that we're having all these visitors coming in. But at the same time, we are also cautious in terms of, because we're just opening up our border, we don't want to trade the economic benefits to risking having another outbreak in Tonga. So we're slowly, as I mentioned in other forum, we're progressively opening up, mixture of being cautious, but at the same time trying to provide opportunity for some of our key hit sectors like tourism and so forth.
How long do you think it will be before you get back in the black?
It depends on a few factors, but we are hoping as soon as possible, again, without compromising the public safety in terms of having more variant or pandemic variant and so forth.
And your businesses, obviously they've suffered, the ones affected too by the volcano, tsunami.
Yes.
How's that looking?
Our main focus tends to be the construction of houses, about 286 houses. We have contracted out about 70% of those houses. Important for us to actually build those houses so that people can get back into some normalcy. At the same time, looking at supporting livelihoods, fishing boats and tractors and so forth.
Minister, with how helpful would it be if obviously a lot of families and workers displaced, they have no work here. Could New Zealand be doing more to offer immigration work opportunities for families affected here in Tonga back in New Zealand?
I think there are, as you know, the RSC scheme makes a significant contribution to several countries across the Pacific, including Tonga, and there are opportunities to work in that area. But it's not that straightforward to some extent because we recognise that, and this is a general comment, not directly in relation to Tonga, but we recognise that there are different views around the way in which RSE as an initiative can help or have a consequent impact on domestic workforce in the Pacific. So we want to have those conversations as they provide real solutions to the Pacific. On the broader issue of labour mobility, that is a matter that has been discussed and is a opportunity area for us. Can I say that in relation to PACER Plus, that's the context within which we've discussed a broader response to be able to help Pacific countries address the issue of ongoing employment.
And sorry, last question from me. Sorry, Prime Minister, sorry to hog the time, but how useful would it be for you to have such a work scheme in place? And I'm not talking about RSE here, but a work scheme in place for workers who were impacted by the January events?
It would be very helpful. I mean, part of the concern about the RSE is the social impact, and having an alternative such as what you're proposing might be something worthwhile discussing, but also looking at possibility of a longer permit for some of those RSEs, so that hopefully they can take their families to New Zealand. Hopefully that will mitigate some of the social issues that we are experiencing here in Tonga.
And is that something, Minister, that you would be prepared to look at?
Within the context of the conversations that we've had, it's been raised in relation to PACER Plus. It's a live conversation. It has different impacts and consequences for different parts of the Pacific, but absolutely an opportunity for us to discuss further what we might do to play a useful role and also not affect domestic labour market issues.
Maloelele and welcome to the Kingdom of Tonga. Vaifanoto Bola from Radio and Television Tonga News. Besides climate change and regional security, I understand that you will be addressing women in leadership tomorrow morning. What are the major areas that you will be doing the addressing of women tomorrow morning? I
think part of it is sharing experience, because we know that encouraging women's leadership at all levels has a transformative impact. I did exactly the same thing in Niue. I met with the Niue Council of Women to map out how we as women can continue to lift each other up to ensure that women's leadership and women's voice can be heard on a number of critical fronts. Climate change, when we think of political representation, when we think about health and education issues, violence against women, gender equality, and the way that women are treated. Those are all issues where there is a common sense that we, just by getting together and networking, we can continue to amplify the impact and share our own experience. And in my mind, there's a lot of benefit in taking that approach.
One last question. Besides the announcement that you'll be making tomorrow, what are the efforts being done by the New Zealand government to reduce their carbon footprint and help minimize climate change in the Pacific?
Well, what we're doing domestically is something that we hope will be, in part, a positive exemplar, that we're a nation who puts our hand up to say that we're a part of this global response. So having an emissions reduction plan, making sure that we have our nationally determined contribution registered and that that's well known within the international arena, making sure that in terms of practical steps we're trying to reduce carbon emissions through transport and moving towards energy electrical cars and practical things like that. So we have some domestic responses, we've got some global commitments, and in a sense the way in which we connect to our global commitment is through climate finance and supporting the Pacific for Pacific-led solutions. We can share our experience also. Potentially, we could also amplify the opportunity with other development partners in the climate finance space to support Pacific-led solutions. But this is not about New Zealand telling the Pacific how to respond to climate change. This must be about the Pacific being supported and enabled to meet their challenge on their terms with the support of partners like New Zealand.
Thank you.
One more?
Tonga and New Zealand have been friends for centuries, and today you're here, and we appreciate this. Looking at our relationship between the years and even up to now, what do you think that New Zealand needs to strengthen our relationship between Tonga and New Zealand, because it's feel maybe threatened by the Chinese influence?
No, New Zealand's quite confident in our relationship with Tonga. It's long-standing. China has been a player in the region or a contributor in the region for a very long time, and we've said that consistently. For the US as well, we welcome the US signal that they want to be contributing in the Pacific and be consistent about that. We think that's a good thing. For New Zealand, what we want to do is to continue to reaffirm, hopefully, that we are a trusted partner. We're a partner of first preference when it comes to key issues where we have a common ambition to address. I think in climate change we've been early to signal we want to be a partner. On security arrangements and natural disasters, we've been quick to respond, and we've been very consistent in that front. And in terms of supporting and strengthening, for example, democratic processes, when asked, we've always put our hand up to say, yes, we will come in and support, Pacific nations in that area. And there are a number of other things. So I feel that New Zealand's relationship with Tonga across the Pacific is strong, and we continue to ensure that we can improve it, because we're on the path of continual improvement, and that we can be trusted long-term partners for the Pacific.
All right. Thank you very much. Malo bitong ulang mai fiafini. Thank you, Minister.